Welcome to another edition of the Reminger Report podcast on emerging technologies. I am excited today to be presenting to you one of my colleagues out of a different office. I'm in Columbus, but Zach Durant, who is with us, he's in our Cleveland, Ohio office. Zach, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today and to talk to us a little bit about what you do and kind of some of the developments in the financial sector that we'll be talking about today. If you could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice area?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Zach. And I work out of Cleveland, Reminger's Cleveland office. My practice primarily focuses on professional liability, including financial services, professional liability, securities litigation and arbitration, business and commercial litigation, and then also broker dealer and investment advisor compliance and enforcement defense.
Now, one of the things I want to make sure that our audience knows before we go any further, that Zach and I did not plan our wardrobes today to match like this, but apparently today, this is the Reminger uniform, is the navy blue jacket and white shirt. We were even joking beforehand that we both have black coffee mugs. Despite the fact that we're in different offices, apparently this is the mandatory look for today. So I know that you recently did a written Reminger report on a company called FTX. Now I know that it's been hard to flip through or scroll through your news feed within the last several months and not see a headline involving FTX. Can you tell us a little bit about what FTX is?
Yeah, sure. So it's definitely been a huge story and one that I think a lot of people know a little bit of something about, but maybe don't get the full picture of what's going on. So FTX was one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges, which means that folks could go on there virtually and buy and sell cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Dogecoin, or even FTX's own token called FTT. FTX was founded fairly recently in 2019 by Sam Bankman-Fried, who ran the company as its CEO. It had a pretty meteoric rise where it was attracting all these big name investors and getting a lot of attention initially, and became a very popular crypto exchange.
Now, are there other companies that are related to FTX, either in as an exchange or maybe as kind of like a ancillary business?
Sure. So the big one is Alameda Research. Alameda was also founded by Sam Bankman-Fried a few years before FTX. And Alameda was a crypto trading firm or hedge fund that Bankman-Fried also ran as CEO. And it would later play a significant role in the downfall of FTX, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Well, so as we're talking about, and as you've kind of led us in that direction, tell us, why has FTX been in the news, and what are we kind of seeing as a result of, of that? What happened to FTX?
Yeah, so as a lot of listeners will probably remember, in around early November 2022, there started to be a lot of news reports coming out about this FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, or as some refer to him, SBF, which gets a little confusing with FTX. But there were news reports that it was diverting investor funds that FTX had collected and diverting them to Alameda Research. There were stories about Bankman-Fried taking loans from Alameda, the money that was transferred from FTX, and using it for personal investments, using it to purchase real estate in the Bahamas, throw extravagant parties, purchase real estate for friends and family, including other executives. So there were a lot of questions about, well, what's going on with this company? Then further news snowballs where there are reports that, well, Alameda's balance sheet and financials are looking weird, where there's a bunch of FTT tokens making up its balance sheet, which again are the tokens issued by FTX. So there was a lot of questions about this company, and it just kept snowballing and snowballing. I felt like every other day there were new reports out there, and Bankman-Fried was very visible and going on like Twitter live streams and talking to people about it, but giving very wishy-washy answers about these questions that were being raised. So it all came to a head very quickly, and he ended up resigning as CEO pretty soon thereafter of FTX, and FTX then filed bankruptcy. So as you can imagine, while all this is going on, not just the public, but the Justice Department and the SEC are paying attention as well. And they're seeing all these reports and probably have been doing investigating of their own even before the media got their hands on it. So in December, so again, only about a month and a half after this stuff starts to come out, Bankman-Fried is arrested in the Bahamas at the request of the US government. And about a day after, the SEC filed a civil lawsuit seeking an injunction in federal court against him for his conduct in running FTX and Alameda.
So that's a lot to kind of digest. One of the things that I think is interesting about this, and you kind of alluded to this, is kind of how quickly some of this stuff unfolded. Which, I mean, I've watched these stories kind of play out before with other businesses. And usually it seems to me, at least, that instead of having this kind of almost daily barrage of problems that were being leaked or put forth in the media, you hear like one issue and then there may be quiet. I mean, you may still hear reporting on that one issue, but this was like a series, at least to me, it appeared to be a series of issues, and the speed at which there was the SEC and the Justice Department kind of sought those remedies. The arrest was, and I'm not a criminal defense lawyer by any stretch, especially not a white collar criminal defense lawyer, but it seemed very quick for me. It seemed very quick for them to be acting, where sometimes it takes them a year or so to build a case. Here you're talking in the span of a month or two, they're building a case and they're seeking the arrest of SBF. So we know right now that there was an arrest warrant for SBF, and you mentioned the FTX was in bankruptcy. What are kind of some of the legal implications of the bankruptcy and the criminal proceedings and the other proceedings that, the civil suit that the SEC is? What are some of these legal implications that these entities and individuals face?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on. I mean, with the bankruptcy, I know that I believe a trustee's been assigned, so they're working on trying to recoup certain things in that regard. But there's also, like we talked about, been the criminal charges against SBF, and there are 8 charges total, and they include wire fraud as to customers, wire fraud as to lenders, conspiracy, including conspiracy to commit securities fraud and commodities fraud and to defraud the United States and violate campaign finance laws. And so it's a pretty big laundry list of charges that he's facing personally, and he's since been extradited to the United States and will eventually stand trial or cut a deal with prosecutors. But in addition, as I mentioned before, there have been these civil charges brought by the SEC against Sam Bankman-Fried, and the SEC is alleging that $1.8 billion were raised by FTX, and he misled those investors who invested that amount of money while also defrauding customers of the exchange. And the SEC alleges that Bankman-Fried hid from his investors that customer funds and investor funds were being diverted to Alameda, like I said, used for his personal investments and real estate purchases and campaign donations. And so the problem is that he's taking money from investors and not telling them what it's going to be used for, and which is a big no-no in the financial world. The SEC is seeking civil fines from him, disgorgement of all of the illegally earned profits, and a bar from serving as an officer or director of a public company. And it's a unique procedure because the SEC is basically citing their jurisdiction conferred on them in the Securities Act and Exchange Act, which allow them to, if they think that an individual has been or is going to commit acts that are violations of those statutes, they can file with a federal court to enjoin those individuals or entities from committing those actions. So there's quite a lot going on in terms of the legal ramifications from all of this.
I know that, I mean, from the bankruptcy standpoint, you talked about, they're trying to recover, right? At least my understanding, because I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer, just like I'm not a criminal defense lawyer. But in the bankruptcy proceeding, the trustees are trying, or the trustee is trying to recover the funds that could be available to pay back the creditors. Is that fair? So people who would have invested, or people who FTX may have owed money to?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Like you, I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer or a criminal lawyer, but just from past examples of these fraud situations where, a trustee or someone's appointed to try to wrangle all of these funds to get as much as they can back to investors. I remember the Bernie Madoff fallout taking quite a long time for them to do that. So, we might be looking at years where they're still trying to gather up a lot of these losses.
Now, I have seen, because it's one of the many emerging technologies that I follow, is the impacts, whether they're real or perceived, that the collapse of FTX may have on the cryptocurrency and the crypto industry in kind of in a wider spread fashion. Do you have any kind of insight as to what impact FTX's downfall may have on the crypto industry?
Yeah, so I think one of the big ones that we're looking at and keeping our eyes open for is increased regulation over the cyber the crypto industry. There's been a lot of well, I should say there's been an opinion that the cryptocurrency industry is not as widely regulated as traditional securities, other investments, things like that. And it makes sense because it's an emerging technology, like you said, and it's a new thing that, when these statutes, a lot of them and regulations were written, just didn't exist. So I think it's, for some people, it's confirmed their concern over the lack of regulation. I think, there's even been confusion amongst regulators as to things like whether or not a crypto coin is a security and therefore under the SEC's jurisdiction. In more recent times, the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, said that these tokens and coins are securities, and that he's directing the SEC staff to go directly to the issuers and the exchanges for these cryptocurrencies and to try to get them to come into compliance with applicable laws and regulations where appropriate as securities. So, this could certainly be a springboard for regulators like the SEC to get their hands around cryptocurrency and to get more involved in regulating it and ensuring that it's safe for investors.
That's one of the things that I've watched, well-respected and well-known individuals in the investment markets talk about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Ethereum, you name it, Ripple. And I've seen now where people have discounted it, or who have, come out and said this is a fraud. And then some of those people have flipped and said, well, maybe there is some legitimate use for some of this as an investment. And then after the FTX, they said, this is only confirming what I originally thought. The whole thing's a scam. What I wonder, though, is whether or not the increased regulation and essentially if the SEC is going as far as to say this is a security, then all of a sudden the increased regulation over the industry may actually add some legitimacy to the industry. Because it's almost as if the SEC is saying, yes, we do recognize this. I mean, even if there is a speculative nature, or even if there is a component of this that is difficult to understand the intrinsic, value of these coins, the fact that somebody else is recognizing these as a security then gives it some credence almost.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. That could well be how it plays out. And, a lot of this is on the heels of we've seen more traditional institutions embrace cryptocurrency. I had a Reminger report a few years ago where the traditional banks are starting to recognize cryptocurrencies as a form of currency and things like this. So, and you're seeing a lot of people, like you said, who confirming their belief that it is unstable and not a good investment. But, there's people on the other side that say, look, this was a fraudster, one-off fraudster who did bad things, and it doesn't reflect the currency as a whole. So you do hear both sides of that, and I guess time will tell.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, from a consumer standpoint, somebody who may be looking into investing, or who is already invested, is there anything important you think that as consumers we should be taking away from the FTX situation, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I mean, and consumers may be affected by this if they're already holding cryptocurrencies. They may have seen a decline in the value of their crypto assets as a result of this. They might see it from increased regulation. We don't know. Time will tell. But I think it highlights the importance of knowing whether your investments are made with folks who are in compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. And it also shows the crypto issuers and the crypto exchanges that it's probably a good idea to get under compliance if you're not already, with regard to the cryptocurrency stuff. So yeah, I think this will present even more lessons learned over the time that these cases play out. And it's definitely been an interesting story for sure.
Well, Zach, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and to come on. I was thinking as we were talking about this, as you were talking about how this is going to play out in the next, I don't know, 6 months or so, we may have you back on to discuss how this has played out. I don't know that, all of the proceedings will be wrapped up by then, but certainly it will be interesting to see, like you said, kind of the bookends to this and see kind of how this ends. So
I'd love to, and I appreciate you having me on. And anybody out there who has any questions on this stuff, cryptocurrency regulations like this, can contact Reminger's professional financial services professional liability group.
I appreciate that, Zach. Thanks again for joining us today, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach.